The office ones only ring like 3 times. You ready to begin? All right. Good afternoon. This meeting of the Community Development Board is called to order on September 17th. Welcome, everyone. If everyone will please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This board consists of 7 members and 1 alternate who are appointed by the City Council and serve voluntarily. I am Michael Boutskas, and I will ask the other members and the staff to introduce themselves, beginning on my left.
Mary Lau.
Mike Flannery.
Brian Barker.
Jay Daniel, attorney for the board.
Lauren Matzke, Planning and Development.
Ellen Crandall, Planning and Development.
Michael Foligno, Assistant City Attorney.
Gordon Behar.
John Petrocchi. Chris Anaskevich.
Please remember to turn off your cell phones so they do not become a distraction during the meeting. Please also refrain from having conversations in this room so that we might hear all the testimony given today. To ensure a complete record of this board's actions, we ask that each individual wishing to speak, including the applicant, speak into the microphone at the podium in front of us, clearly state your name, and spell your last name for the clerk. Now I'll ask that all those in attendance today who plan to speak to please rise and be sworn in by the clerk.
You swear affirm the testimony you're about to give is the entire truth.
Agendas of today's meeting are on the podium to your left near the entry door. Also on this podium are a roster of the Community Development Board, the list of city staff experts and their resumes, the board's rules of procedure, and the annual schedule of this board. Our first order of business is to review and approve the minutes from last month's meeting. May I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
So move.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next item on our agenda is citizens to be heard for items that are not on the agenda. If you're here today to speak on a matter that is not on the agenda, please approach the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Bill Johnson, 2694 Redford Court West in Clearwater. I'm also the government liaison for the Clearwater Neighborhood Coalition. I speak today to follow up on your July meeting. At that meeting, you made suggestions for improving the quality of the public input process. I commend you for that direction. Your June 25th meeting was very long. You were very generous with your time that day, but as you discussed in July, the public's unfamiliarity with the rules and the process were obvious. And so I wonder what the status is on that process. Perhaps you can respond later. I've also heard that you will be offering your community development board members some kind of training, or perhaps you've already had that. I would commend the inclusion of the video from the December 10th, 2004 CDB training session as an excellent source of information. In that video, the author of the code, Charlie Seaman, highlighted the objectives of the code: to be predictable, to lead to rapid decisions on the part of investments, to generate quality development, and to be operating in a redevelopment mode rather than a greenfield development. The last one resulted in what he called a unique code for the Clearwater's special situation, the existing redevelopment code that was developed in 1999. I'd like to share one unique aspect of that change, and that's the collapse of the multiple zoning districts into a smaller subset. And let's look at the tourist district as an example. There are two handouts that you should have. One is stapled, the other is a single sheet. And on the stapled sheet, I draw your attention to Code Section 1-106, the transition rules, and if you turn to the second and the third page, you can see that the commercial beach, resort commercial, and two categories were collapsed into the tourist zone, combined into one zone. Now, if you look at the single page handout for the tourist district, in the dark box in the center are the three old districts that were combined in tourism: the beach commercial district, the resort commercial 24, and the resort commercial 28. Highlighted on the green line, the maximum height in those districts were 35, 30, and 80 feet respectively, not including the bonus for the parking addition. So we're really talking about heights of 47, 45, and 92 feet. The new tourist district, however, if you look over on the right, in the flexible standard, you can go up to 50 feet, or for the flexible development, you can go up to 100 feet. So the question is, why would any code author in their right mind rezone an area that previously allowed only 47 feet to a bonus of 100 feet? Well, the video from that training session answers that question by saying the objective is to allow flexibility where it makes sense, both for the project and the surrounding area. Thus, the introduction of that section 3-914 that was so much discussed previously. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, we have areas of the city that need revitalization. Those areas were developed over the 100 years of Clearwater's history, and during those years, the rules changed as they applied to the new greenfield development as the city spread. So the application of a single set of rules in every place in Clearwater wouldn't be a good fit. Thus, the compromise that, according to Mr. Simon, was to add flexibility with criteria. Those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I do want to add just September with Mr. Daniel provide the training at his offices, and I think others have rescheduled other times perhaps, but there were 4 of us in attendance that day to kind of go through the procedures and the processes, and I know the staff is working on the information sheets, so hopefully that will continue, the process will continue.
And did that include the example that I showed here?
No, the training was more of a session in understanding the rules and procedures that we have in place.
Procedures for the hearing?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So, got another opportunity coming up.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
First of all, has this been recorded? I just don't see it on the screens as well.
Yes, Pete got, Ian set up here the screens before he left.
If I looked on the YouTube, I could find it. I mean,
Yes, this is it.
online, okay.
This is being recorded.
And just to be clear, the drawings and things and the designs were not discussed. It was like sunset laws and sunshine laws and things like that, and the code under which we operate. Not talking about what a building is, how high it is, or something like that, or how it fits into a neighborhood, or the code specifically. We did not open the book on the code.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public who wishes to be heard? All right, then we'll proceed along with our regular agenda. The board has adopted a consent agenda format, and the consent items are identified as such on the agenda. Consent agenda items are those items for which the Planning and Development Board recommends approval. The applicant is in agreement with any proposed conditions, and no written objections to the case have been received to date. Items may be removed from the consent agenda today by a member of the board, a member of the staff, or any person in the audience for questions or objections. I'll read each item on the consent agenda, and if any person wishes to remove this item from the consent agenda, please so state or raise your hand, and we will remove it from the consent agenda. Items removed from the consent agenda will be heard in the regular order of the meeting. Items that remain on the consent agenda will be approved with a single vote. The items on our consent agenda today are as follows. Case FLD 2019-06017, 64/566 Bay Esplanade. The owner is East Shore International Enterprises. The agent is John Boziak, and the location is on the north side of Bay Esplanade, in the northeast corner of Bay Esplanade and Cypress Avenue. Does anybody wish to have this matter removed from the consent agenda? Hearing none, the next item on our consent agenda is FLD 2019-05015, 19337 US Highway 19 North. The owner is Bayside Apartments Owner, LLC. The agent is Rick Brown. Location is approximately 830 feet east of US Highway 19 North, behind the Lincare Holdings buildings. Does anybody wish to have this item removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, do I have a motion for approval of consent agenda items?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve case FLD 2019-06017 and case FLD 2019-05015 on today's consent agenda based on evidence in the record, including the applications and the staff reports, and hereby adopt the findings of fact and conclusions of law stated in the staff reports with conditions of approval as listed.
Do I have a second on the motion? Motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Moving on with the next item on our agenda for today, we have level 3 applications. The case before us today is case TA 2019-06002, amendments to the Community Development Code. The owner is BDG Properties. The agent is Brian Ongst, and it's a request to review an amendment of the Clearwater Community Development Code to expand the geographical area within which regional subdistrict of US 19 for self-storage warehouses. Mr. Farina, want to make any motion?
Mr. Chairman, do you want to read the procedures for level 3?
Oh, my apologies. I skipped right to it. With my new book here, I don't have my little notes to shift me to the right place. Okay, all level 3 cases such as plan amendment, rezoning, or development agreements are considered legislative hearings. The Community Development Board reviews the application, the staff report, correspondence, and all evidence presented today, and makes a recommendation to the City Council. For level 3 applications, City Council makes the final decision. The procedure for all level 3 cases is as follows. Presentation by planning staff, 10 minutes maximum. Presentation by the applicant, 10 minutes maximum. Comments by the public, 3 minutes per person. Closing remarks by the planning and development staff, 3 minutes maximum. Closing remarks by the applicant, 3 minutes maximum. And closing of the public hearing, followed by discussion and vote by the board. And as I've already indicated, our first level 3 case today is TA 2019-06002.
Which, would you like me to use this side or that side? No, I have stuff. I don't need it just yet. I don't need it yet. Good afternoon, Lauren Matzke, Planning and Development. The item before you is an amendment to the Community Development Code that was generated by a property owner on US 19. This is unusual because this is the second time the city has received such an application within the last year to amend the US 19 district. The code allows an applicant to propose a text amendment provided they submit a development application in conjunction with the text amendment. The applicant met this requirement. However, the Development Review Committee has determined that revisions are required to the application to meet the US 19 zoning district and development standards outside of this proposed amendment, so some redesign will be required. The proposed text amendment relates to permitted uses within the US 19 zoning district. The applicant is requesting to change the code because they would like to construct a self-storage warehouse on a property where it's not currently permitted. Text amendments are not uncommon, but they are typically initiated by City Council or the Community Development Coordinator, and therefore are usually written consistent with the standards for review for text amendments outlined in the code. I've explained that the code requires the applicant to submit an application for development in conjunction with the code, and that's required so that they can demonstrate the need for the amendment and the ability to meet that amendment or the code in general. But the standards for review in section 4-601, which apply to text amendments, are limited to 1, whether the proposed amendment is consistent with and furthers the goals, policies, and objectives of the comprehensive plan, and 2, whether the proposed amendment furthers the purposes of this development code and other city ordinances and actions designed to implement the plan. I want to highlight that for you because this is the basis on which Planning and Development's recommendation of denial is founded. Before I walk you through the specifics of the proposal, I would like to briefly talk about the work the city has done prior to this to support redevelopment along US 19, which includes the city ordinances and actions designed to implement the comprehensive plan. As you know, the city has spent a good deal of money and time studying and planning for redevelopment on US 19. Table 1 in the staff report summarizes these efforts and associated expenses. Staff reviewed this in detail last year with the previous application to amend the code for self-storage warehouses in US 19, but it is important to incorporate this into the record here as well. Our work initially began in 2006 with the evaluation and appraisal report of the comprehensive plan. At that time, the city's redevelopment efforts were focused on downtown and the beach. The evaluation and appraisal report identified the need to develop a more comprehensive and diversified strategy for redevelopment, and the concepts of activity centers and a citywide design structure were developed. A total of 7 areas were identified for further study, and 3 of those are contained within the US 19 district. Based on that report, the areas around Westfield and Clearwater malls were designated as activity centers, and the other areas along US 19 were identified as a redevelopment corridor within that citywide design structure. That citywide design structure serves as the city's guide to development and land use decisions. Then, of course, in 2011, Clearwater Greenprint recognized the need for the city to reduce greenhouse gas emissions citywide, and identified the need for land use and transportation to be more closely linked for economic and environmental reasons by creating vibrant mixed-use transit-supportive activity centers on US 19, linking jobs and people. During this same time, the city completed its economic development strategic plan, which focused on the need to pursue strategies to diversify the city's tax base, gain high-paying jobs, and improve business vitality. One of the priority strategies that came out of that economic development strategic plan was to establish an employment center overlay district to encourage higher wage employment along US 19 and to facilitate development projects that generate higher wage jobs by allowing that higher density and transitioning out of incompatible uses over time. In 2012, City Council approved the US 19 Corridor Redevelopment Plan, which organized the corridor into those 3 different revitalization areas: the Regional Center, Neighborhood Center, and at that time we were calling them the in-between areas. Each area serves a specific purpose, and the Regional Center is envisioned as a regionally significant cluster of mixed-use development with an emphasis on employment-intensive and transit-supportive uses. During this time, the Pinellas Planning Council, which is now known as Forward Pinellas, prepared a significant update to the countywide plan, creating the activity center and multimodal corridor categories for areas where cities have planned for transit-oriented development to ensure a critical mass of people for future transit. The corridor plan identified what steps the city would need to take to meet the requirements for having activity center and multimodal corridor designated on the maps. We worked closely with Forward Pinellas throughout the transition period, and because of the planning efforts and commitments to a form-based code, Forward Pinellas designated US 19 with activity center and multimodal corridor when they adopted their maps. These amendments resulted in significant increases in development potential to ensure critical mass for transit-supportive development. But the city still needed to develop those zoning standards consistent with these objectives. The culmination of all of this work occurred in 2017 when council adopted the US 19 zoning district and development standards and rezoned the entire corridor area to this new district. It established 3 sub-districts with distinctive objectives, development potential, and uses based on the corridor redevelopment plan and the countywide plan rules. The result was a streamlined approval process for projects that meet the development standards and limited flexibility for certain standards to ensure development is meeting all the objectives of these plans. Quickly, I'll reference these 2 maps. The regional center sub-district is the subject of today's amendment, so I'll focus mostly on that. These maps show the areas that are governed by it. The dark blue is the regional sub-districts, and then you can see, can we zoom out just a little? I don't remember how. Well, at the bottom there are some areas that are corridor. This is the Gulf to Bay area, and the subject property is highlighted there. These are the city's most intensive activity centers outside of downtown Clearwater and are in place for employment-intensive and transit-supportive uses with an allowable FAR of 2.5 to incentivize this type of development. The corridor subdistrict, which I mentioned is kind of the goldish-orange area, is immediately abutting the regional center, and that allows the development at an FAR of 1.5. The subject property is only a tiny portion of the overall regional center. It is 1.13 acres out of almost 915 acres, but that does not mean this application is insignificant. I would like to walk you through the amendment. The applicant is proposing to revise section B-303A, Table 2, Use and Parking, to expand the area where self-storage warehouse is allowed as a flexible standard use in the regional center subdistrict. The proposed language limits the self-storage warehouse to parcels 1.1 acres to 1.2 acres in size fronting Seville Boulevard that existed on or before June 3rd, 2019. Only one parcel meets this standard, which is the property the applicant has under contract at 2611 Seville Boulevard. Self-storage warehouse uses in this expanded area would also be required to have 100% of the ground floor frontage and a minimum of 20% of the total ground floor area occupied by retail, restaurant, and or office uses not associated with the self-storage use. This provision is consistent with the amendment process last year. The proposed amendment would require access to all storage units from the building interior and would prohibit outdoor storage. These 2 use-specific criteria were also included in the amendment process last year. The same standards are included this year in an attempt to address or mitigate the inconsistencies with the city's plans and code inherent in the self-storage warehouse use. Staff recommends denial of this application because the proposed amendment is inconsistent with and in direct conflict with the goals and objectives of many city plans, including Clearwater Greenprint, the Economic Development Strategic Plan, the US 19 Corridor Redevelopment Plan, the Clearwater Comprehensive Plan, and the Community Development Code. Expansion of this use continues to negatively impact the city's plans for US 19 as implemented through the US 19 zoning district and development standards. The standards were adopted in 2017, and this is the second time a privately initiated amendment has been submitted in a single year. We acknowledge that the specific property carved out through this proposed amendment is not without development challenges. It is an unusual shape, it has a large easement across it, and it is on Seville Boulevard, which is not a major cross street in the regional center. It has been vacant for some time, and the city has cited the property owner for overgrowth and other code issues. But the Community Development Code is written to apply to more than 1 or 2 properties. Through the planning process, appropriate uses for each subdistrict were defined and incorporated when the US 19 zoning district was adopted. The planning process and the code itself provide certainty for property owners, the development community, and residents regarding the city's vision and expectations for future development in these defined areas. And as of last year, the regional center allows self-storage warehouses in areas where city council approved it. Those areas just don't include this particular property. This application would afford, did I go over? I can stop, or
How much more do you have to go?
maybe a minute.
Okay, and I'll afford the applicant extra minute as well.
Absolutely, thank you, sir.
Just the timer's not working up there, so it's impossible for the presenter to know how much time.
I'll give her a minute, give you a minute as well. When it beeps, when it beeps, it'll be 1 minute to go. How's that?
That's it. I know. I was like, I didn't even notice because I was just going because it's usually my peripheral vision. So thank you. Regional centers are afforded the highest development potential of 2.5 FAR to support the goals and achieve vision outlined in the different city plans. When developing the US 19 district and Table 2 use and parking, a variety of permitted uses was further expanded from what is identified in the comprehensive plan, but without thought regarding sorry, I've now lost my place. Anyway, self-storage warehouses do not fit the profile of a use that will contribute to transit supportive or active areas. Self-storage warehouses do not contribute to the vitality of an area because relatively few people frequent the sites as they are a place to store things, not people. It does not draw people. The applicant will show you the elevations of the proposed self-storage warehouse to show how nice a building can look even when the primary use is storage. But that should not be a factor in your evaluation of the text amendment today. You're being asked to determine if expanding the location on which this warehouse use is permitted is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and would the amendment further the purposes of the code and other city ordinances and actions, and it does not.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions of staff? So Pat, I guess so we're consistent. If you set it for 10 again, when it beeps, then he'll know he's got a minute to go.
Okay, yeah, she's like 47 seconds.
Okay.
I don't know if this is like not turned on or.
The whole thing is out.
Oh, it is? Okay. Okay, no worries, we'll figure it out. And hopefully we'll be 11 minutes and if you get the hook. I've had worse, so. Can you all see that? Is that,
No, it's not up.
it's not up?
Oh,
It's up there. Yeah, we got it behind you,
There
Pat.
you go. Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Brian Unks on behalf of the applicant. The property owner is BDG Architects with Chris Karshner, and the contract purchaser is RK Partners, Mr. Reed Hayden, civil engineer, and Mr. Kevin Menendez. To the contrary, we respectfully disagree with the staff. This text amendment will in no way inhibit or impair the implementation of the US 19 plan. On the contrary, it will facilitate the implementation of the US 19 plan as to this very, 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 very small, very specific site. The encumbrances that were referenced in the staff report are so severe that there's no way that anything could be developed that's entitled under the current plan to the 2.5 FAR. And Mr. Hayden will be able to show you that what's being proposed, which is 3,000 square feet of retail, restaurant, or office on the ground floor, and an additional 3,000 square feet of office on the top floor, 6,000 total, is exactly what could potentially be developed there from a development perspective, but not from a market perspective, because the competitor across the street is Clearwater Mall. And this site is behind a 7-Eleven, and has not been developed and is not seen from the frontage of US 19. It does not front US 19, it's not visible from US 19 other than the street, the trees. This is the site, and I tried to mark it out with my pen. It is surrounded to the south and to the east with corridor. If this site had been in corridor, we wouldn't be here because self-storage is allowed. Self-storage is an entitled use in corridor without any active use, without any associated retail, restaurant, or office. So respectfully, if this one small, extremely encumbered site that makes up 0.02% of the entire US 19 plan area, 0.12% of the regional center, were orange instead of blue, go Gators, we wouldn't be here and we wouldn't be requesting the office and the restaurant and the retail. I want to show you a little bit of the pictures so you can kind of get an image of this. This is the site that's behind the 7-Eleven across the street from Costco. It is undeveloped. It's probably one of the only parcels in the regional center that's not developed, that's not owned by FDOT. This is a picture from Google Earth from the ground. You can see the trees. This is the other side of the site. And here it is from US 19. You can see the 7-Eleven here, and this is what is abutting the site, the rear of the 7-Eleven and the sanitation area of the 7-Eleven. We do have because we've heard from in the past when we went through the first text amendment about consolidation. I do have a loose email in your packet from Mr. Rob Booz. He's the owner of the 7-Eleven site. And I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but number one, he supports the text amendment. Number two, he has a long-term lease with 7-Eleven and has no intention of not renewing that lease. Number three, he has no intention of purchasing this site. It's been on the market for years and years and years and has not been purchased. And that's it. So he supports the text amendment, and he is not going to consolidate these parcels or do anything to redevelop that 7-Eleven for a long, long, long time. They have 4 5-year renewal options that kick in 2022. So theoretically, you're talking about till 2042 of a 7-Eleven. So we're talking about facilitating the redevelopment of this parcel. Again, we respectfully disagree with the staff. This is a legislative decision. It's not a quasi-judicial decision. So all we need for approval by the city council is a rational basis. There is no evidence that this site being redeveloped, as is being suggested, would impair the pedestrian access. In fact, we're required to have interconnectivity between the parcels. So we're going from an undeveloped site to a developed site that's developed to the US 19 standards. This board just unanimously approved the same project on the Denny's site, which is what we went through with the text amendment the last time with the city council, which was passed by the city council. And that project met each and every one of the design requirements of all of the goals and implementations of the US 19 plan. So there's no evidence that this small site, not fronting US 19, behind the 7-Eleven, would in any way impair pedestrian access to US 19, transit-oriented development, or anything along those lines. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hayden now, who's going to explain a little bit about why this proposal is before the board and the process he went through to determine to make the proposal.
Thank you, Brian. Reed Hayden, 105 Bayside Drive, Clearwater. Reed Hayden, Haydon. So when we first encountered this site, we analyzed it for a number of different uses, all within the allowable uses. And we realized quickly it was going to be very difficult. There are a number of site constraints that Lauren went over, but we have a setback that's based on the US 19 plan. This is a street frontage type. We have the buffers that are required. This is a 50-foot wide utility easement for the city of St. Pete. Basically leaves you with only about 59% of the total site, which is already a very small site that is developable. In order to develop something that meets the envisioned FAR, the intensities within the US 19 plan, you would need to build a parking structure to meet the parking requirement. Just to give you an idea what that would be like, this red net hatching area, that is about the smallest possible, humanly possible parking structure that could ever be built. This one out here happens to be what the footprint of the parking structure on the north end of Clearwater Beach is. So we looked at this site, so ultimately parking is going to control use here. So we started looking at this site for retail. We sent this site out to about 36 different tenants. No one liked it, and reason being poor traffic counts in Seville, poor visibility from US 19, and too much competition from the other retail areas like Clearwater Mall. From a residential perspective, again, to build to the intensities that you would need for residential, you need a parking structure. That's not going to happen. Beyond that, its location and proximity to 19 is not very desirable for residential, nor its proximity to very intense commercial uses. So we looked at it for the sake of office, and this is just a reality of the market out there, and that is that there is a glut of supply. So just in our market area, we have 262,000 square feet of office available. That's an average occupancy rate of 73%. That's a 27% vacancy. That is not conducive to developing additional office. There's clearly a glut of supply in the area. Beyond that, again, you'd have to build a parking structure to accommodate the parking that office requires. So we decided to look at this as if, okay, let's look at what parking we can put on this site and determine how big of an office retail establishment you could develop it and compare it to what we're actually proposing. So currently we show on our site plan 18 spaces. If we really squeezed them in, we could probably add another 10 spaces. The total possible surface parking now would be 28 spaces. Based on the retail office parking requirement of 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet, we're looking at an ultimate, a potential build-out of 7,000 square feet. We're proposing 6,000 square feet. So we're only missing the mark by 1,000 square feet. It's only 14.3%. So we're building something that will allow us actually to build to the US 19 vision. It'll have the street frontage, it'll have the pedestrian access, it'll have the architectural access, it'll have, or design, it'll have the site design, and it'll have the intensities that are envisioned and encourage others to do so as well. And I think that self-storage is a part of a mixed-use development. When you look at the entire activity center of Gulf to Bay and US 19, there's already a lot of commercial, there's some hotel there, there's some residential. Self-storage is a complementary use for all of that. And just like with greenhouse emissions, you want these things close to where the people that are actually using them are.
Thank you, Reed. And so to follow up on that, to cite to the staff report, page 6, according to Pinellas County Economic Development, the Pinellas County market does have potential to support more self-storage units. It is under the national average for the number of units and square footage per person and has higher rents because of lower supply. Pinellas County has about 5.4 square feet of self-storage per person, or only 77% of the national average of about 7 square feet. Local developers are looking for creative ways to build self-storage in Pinellas County and say that the local market is challenging because of high land values and the lack of available real estate that can accommodate self-storage. So there's a market demand, and that's also based on all of the multifamily that's going in. Bainbridge just put 360 units just south of the site on the waterfront. Wood Partners is putting in another 314 units across the street on the old Auto Nation sites that are desperately needed of redevelopment. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more multifamily going in. This site is not a strategic site for the implementation of the US 19 plan. It is not a key linchpin. It's not at a major access point. It's not at a key corner. It is almost a forgotten parcel. One that when we began discussing it with the staff and council, the question kind of came up of, yeah, we're not really sure why we even included it in the activity center. So again, I want to point out to you that the city council, wrap it up, the city council has already determined that this exact proposal on 2 other sites meets the goals and objectives and respectfully disagreed with the staff in terms of the consistency with the comprehensive plan. It's already an allowable use. This site has more encumbrances, has more challenges than the Denny site did. And this is, when we heard from you the last time, what the majority of you said, if this Denny site was before us for a site plan approval, we'd approve it, but we are worried that this is going to open the floodgate and open the doors to a bunch of other sites, particularly the fact that it wasn't limited to those 2 sites. It was at 18 sites, I think, at the time. So we listened to that and we tried to narrow it as much as we possibly could to this one site, and so that's why we believe the city council is supportive of it. We've met with the mayor and the council members. All of them gave us at least the go-ahead to say, go ahead and pursue it. 3 of them said definitively that they would support it. We didn't get really, any significant pushback from any of them. So I do anticipate that the council will agree that this site needs to be redeveloped and that this is an appropriate text amendment for that redevelopment. Thank you.
All right. Does anybody have any questions of the applicant? Okay. No questions from the applicant. Is there any comments from the public? All right. Any closing remarks by planning development staff?
Would you mind reminding me how much time I have?
I'll tell you when it turns yellow.
Okay.
That'll be 45 seconds.
Okay, thank you. The city is seeing success with the US 19 zoning district and development standards, in particular in the regional center subdistrict. We have several projects approved, as mentioned, we also have several under construction or some that have been constructed in the regional center. So we're seeing the reinvestment in existing buildings through renovations and changes of use in addition to new construction. Because the city recognizes the need for self-storage, it allocated it initially within the corridor subdistrict. And as Mr. Onks noted, that is immediately adjacent to the east. So I'd like to point out, this is from the code, and this is in the administrative section, and there is actually a process to request an amendment to a future land use map and to change the sub-district. So there was a different path that could be followed for this, as opposed to amending the language to allow a certain use on a certain individual property. He did not pursue that. The regional center subdistrict has significant FAR of 2.5, and that is in part why we are seeing the market pressure to develop our regional center with the self-storage warehouse use. So we're not arguing that there's a market for it. We're just saying as a community, the vision was to include it somewhere else. The Planning and Development Department believes that the proposed amendment is inconsistent with and does not further the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan or the intent and purposes of the Community Development Code, which are the standards for which this text amendment should be reviewed. Thank you.
Can we ask questions at this point, or do we want to wait till the end?
Why don't we wait till he gives his rebuttal as well, or his final closing argument, then we'll ask any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to remind you that this site is surrounded to the east and to the south by the corridor district, which is entitled to build self-storage. It is severely encumbered, as the staff recognizes and recognized in our meetings, as the council recognizes in our meetings. It has a 50-foot wide easement in favor of the city of St. Petersburg for stormwater usage. To build to 2.5 FAR on this site, you're talking about 120,000 square foot. For 120,000 square foot of retail, office, or restaurant, you would need 480 parking spaces. That is clearly not ever going to happen on this site as it currently exists from a development perspective. So what we're talking about is an extremely de minimis, narrow text amendment, which is very similar to a land use amendment or a rezoning, as noted by Ms. Matsky. There's a different process for that, but this is very similar to that. I'd say substantially the same to that, in order to facilitate the vision of the plan, in order to facilitate the redevelopment of this site, which has not been developed, is one of the only sites in the activity center that hasn't been developed, and which has a history of code violations, which include people dumping their stuff in the woods, beer cans, presumably from the nearby 24-hour 7-Eleven. So again, this is not a strategic parcel that is going to make or break the US 19 plan. In fact, this text amendment, if supported by the CDB and the council, will facilitate the implementation of the plan, not impair or inhibit it, and will allow the owner to develop the property as it would be developed if it were simply orange instead of blue. And again, we've worked very closely with the staff. The staff actually suggested some drafting changes to make it more consistent. So I think the staff recognized on page 6 that there are some minor modifications to bring consistency, and that the wording is a little better than the current wording. So that's also a benefit that's being proposed by the text amendment. Thank you.
Before I close the public hearing, do we have questions? Mr. Barrett?
Yeah, questions, I guess, for staff, probably is the easiest.
Yes, sir.
So you mentioned that there was other options as opposed to the code amendment. Is it possible to have this moved into the corridor district? As opposed to?
We don't have an application in front of us, so, you know, in that regard.
Is that a mechanism that's available to the applicant?
Yes.
Process?
Yes, it would be a future land use map amendment because the future land use map designates as regional center or corridor as well. So it would be a future land use map amendment, and then instead of a rezoning, which is kind of the typical process that we're used to them going hand in hand, it would be a text amendment to change the sub-district, because that resides only on the maps within the code.
And in that corridor district, so if it was amended to be in the future land use so that it was part of the corridor district, it would be an allowable use, as the applicant suggested?
Yes.
But the FAR would be reduced.
That's correct. It would be a 1.5 FAR.
And currently, it appears they're around a 2.0 FAR,
I
roughly?
believe it's more than that.
More
I
than
think
2.0.
it's
I didn't
about
get the exact
2.3 or 2.4, but I'm going from memory.
Okay, thanks.
Would the staff have the same recommendation? I mean, if they took that route? I mean, I realize you didn't review that application, but I mean,
Sure, I understand that. I think generally, that's a more appropriate process to have requested this. Like I said, amending the code for an individual parcel is in some ways, you know, it's not what the code is intended to do. So an application like that in a parcel like this, I think there could potentially be a compelling case for it through an appropriate process.
I have a question. You made a couple of comments about referencing the fact that this text amendment was being requested with respect to a single parcel of land. My reading of 4601 says that's okay. Do you agree with that? It may be unusual, I think, was your first comment about it, but it's allowed under the code, right?
It is allowed under the code. I would state that in my tenure here, we've processed several such requests, but the way they are written, they apply to any parcel within the district that was being amended. So it's unusual to write a code amendment specific to a parcel, especially utilizing the use-specific criteria. And I could provide an example if needed.
I'd just like to be on record, I was contacted by the developer and by, I think, Brian Augst on the phone with private messages that we were not violating the Sunshine Act by doing that. I think it's perfectly legal to do that. And I do not think it had any change in how I would, not influencing how I would be making a decision. But what I didn't have is a chance to talk to the city about it. Now they've had to call them up, and it's a very complicated issue of process versus the building. And what have we started up here when we're going over the hill and starting a change, when we change the process? How many are we going to get in the future? And I didn't have a chance to discuss that with you one-on-one, also not on the Sunshine Act. The only time I can talk to you now, we're on the Sunshine. So I have to ask stupid questions in front of everybody. I don't like that. So I just didn't want to be on be on the record that those two occurred and some did not. And I do not really feel comfortable without getting, I mean, this is really the first introduction to all the complexities of this thing. And anyway, that's the end of I'd like things to go the right way and be a standard way, and I thought we learned in our training that we're supposed to be saying if the code is, we're following the code, not deciding if a nice building is in a nice location. I think they're two different questions. Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions before I close? I want to get the questions out of the way so then we can deliberate amongst ourselves without anything else. Okay. I'm going to close the public portion of the hearing. And does anybody have any further comments, or does anybody have a motion on this particular matter on which we'll have discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a couple thoughts that I want to share. I've worried through this one a bit, and because I think I agree, and council has advised me that the previous case, the Denny's property, it doesn't set a precedent that any of these text amendment requests stand on their own and have to be considered by us as unique requests. And I decided in looking at this, because I appreciate what the applicant is saying about the difficulty of using the property, and the city code is overloaded with references to policies and goals of developing underutilized properties in the city. We have a lot of discretion on what we can do acting in a legislative role. However, at the end of the day, I come back to the same place. I don't disagree with Mr. Augst that this is a property that, if developed in the manner that the developer wants to develop it, would be perhaps a good thing long-term. But if I look back at the history, much of it cited in the staff report, the history of the creation of the US 19 plan, there was a tremendous amount of work done. And again, the staff report references specific, conscious, front of the mind, looking at self-storage facilities and where they wanted them and where they didn't want them. The plan, in my view, is still new. And to the extent the city wants an opportunity, this is the same conclusion I reached in the Denny's property case. I think that while there are goals and policies of the city that this project might support, I think on balance, the 4601F standards that Ms. Matzke cited in her presentation are not met here. And there are a number of inconsistencies with the well-thought-out US 19 plan, and I think that the city ought to have their opportunity to live with it for a while.
Yeah, I think it's a tough parcel, just like the other one was, and I think it makes for tough development. I think it should be developed. I think that there's opportunities to develop it. I just don't agree with the approach of, and really what's in front of us today is a code amendment, not the building itself. It does abut a district that allows it. I would think that there would be another approach to push it into a different district that would allow it and still be within the vision of the master plan for the redevelopment areas. And while I get that reduces the density, I think it'd be more appropriate to be done in perhaps a different way that still allows the parcel to develop. I think that there's opportunities out there to do this. I liken it a little bit to spot zoning. It's not exactly spot zoning, I get it, but it's a situation where it would create an anomaly within a system that doesn't necessarily have to be there for any reason other than additional density for the most part. It's a tough site. I do think that the proposal will work, and I don't. My personal opinion is I just don't support this approach to the approval process.
Mr. Petrarca, do you have any comments? No? Mr. Askevich?
No additional comments.
Just a few words. I mean, I agree with, the applicant. It's not a strategic parcel. It is kind of a forgotten parcel. I don't know if the approach to get there is correct or not, but I think the way they did their due diligence really shows that there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do there. If you're going to need so much parking that you're going to have to put a parking garage that doesn't fit. So I think I would support their proposal.
I'd just say that I think they've done a lot of work, and I understand the arguments. I think they really, but seems like we have a process, and although this only goes for one, is this going to be the last one? Well, the last one we had was only one. Now the second one we have is this the new process of the process, is to only ask for one at a time for anybody that wants to change. And I think there's a correct way to do this, and I'd like it to be done overall, and I don't think we're hurting them that much by having it done right. I think they would have a darn good case to make the change, but I don't think on this route and this process is the right time to do that. And that's my feeling on it now.
If I could just follow up by saying, in response to what Mr. Flannery just said, I think if this process is going to be used to make this change with respect to this one piece of land, that ought to happen at the city council level, and it's not something I'm comfortable doing at this level.
And I don't really have anything to add to what's been said. I would tend to agree with Mr. Behar and Ms. Lau from that perspective. But that being said, if there's no other comment, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend denial of this item based on the evidence and testimony presented in the application, the staff report, and at today's hearing, and that would be my motion.
Okay. Do I have a second on the motion?
I'll second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Yeah.
Would you raise your hand, please? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Majority in favor of the motion. The recommendation is for denial to City Council. That concludes this matter, this hearing for today. Next item is director's items. Does the plan director or staff have any items for today? No?
No.
Okay. There being nothing else, this board is adjourned. Thank you.